Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Chagigah. We are up to Perek Gimel, Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbayev, Neriyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And Le'avdir ben Chaim Lechaim, V'derefua Shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, B'toch Shah Chulei Israel. This Mishnah discusses the 10th stringency, which also concerns Tumah of the hands. Ochalin, Ochalim, Niguvin, Beyadayim, Mesoavot, Baterumah. We may eat dry chulin foods with hands that are tameh, even with terumah food in our mouths. Since hand tumah is only the status of a sheni, a second degree, which is too weak to transmit tumah to chulin food, the chulin remains tahor even when tameh hands touch it, and therefore it may be eaten together with the terumah. Someone who could not put terumah in his own mouth because his hands were tameh had another person do it for him, after which he decided to eat a dry onion or radish of chulin with his terumah. Our Mishnah teaches that he may take the onion with his tameh hands and eat it, because hands that are tameh by rabbinic degree have the status of a sheni, a second degree of tumah, and since chulin food that touches a sheni remains tahor, there is nothing wrong with handling the chulin onion with tameh hands and then eating it together with the terumah. Now the Mishnah emphasizes that only dry food may be eaten by someone who has terumah in his mouth, because when a sheni touches any liquid, the liquid becomes a rishon under rabbinic law, as it says in Mishnah Masechet Parah, chapter 8, Mishnah 7. Therefore, if a sheni hand touches liquid on wet chulin food, it makes the liquid a rishon, which in turn makes the chulin food that it is touching a sheni. And when he then puts the chulin food into his mouth, it makes the terumah in his mouth a shlishi and unfit to be eaten. This is how the Rav explains the Mishnah based off the Gemara on page 24b. Avalo b'kodesh, but a person may not do so with kodesh food in his mouth out of concern that he might touch the kodesh food in his mouth with his tameh hands and make it tameh. Now kodesh becomes tameh when it touches a sheni. Because of this, the sages prohibited anyone with kodesh in his mouth to eat food with tameh hands, which are a sheni, out of concern that he might unthinkingly touch his hand to the kodesh in his mouth and make it tameh. Although the same concern exists in the case of terumah, which becomes unfit when touched by a sheni, the sages relied on the caution taken by Kohanim when they eat terumah. In the case of kodesh, which has a higher level of holiness, the sages were reluctant to rely on cautions alone, and therefore issued the decree. The 11th and final way that the standards of Tahara for kodesh are more stringent than those of terumah concerns a rabbinic requirement regarding immersion. Ha'onen and onen, after his period of aninut has passed, now upon the death of any of one's 7 closest relatives, father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, or spouse, a person enters a state called aninut, which lasts until burial, and he is known as the onen. And onen is biblically forbidden to partake of kodesh until nightfall on the day that the death occurred. So ha'onen and onen, after his period of aninut has passed, u'mechusar kippurim, and a mechusar kippurim after he has brought his offerings. A mechusar kippurim, literally one who lacks atonement, refers to someone who is required to bring an offering at the end of his or her tumah period to become fully tahor, in addition to the usual immersion, and wait until nightfall. Although he has immersed and waited for nightfall, since he has not yet brought the required offering, he is a mechusar kippurim, and he may not eat kodesh until he brings the required atonement offerings. Tzirchin tevilah kodesh, they need immersion to become fit for eating kodesh by rabbinic decree. Since an onen and a mechusar kippurim are forbidden to eat kodesh, they might not bother protecting themselves against tumah. Therefore, the sages decreed that after leaving such a status, they must immerse in a mikveh before eating kodesh. The reason for this immersion is not to remove tumah, for an onen is not necessarily tameh, unless, of course, he comes into contact with the body of his deceased relative. And a mechusar kippurim has already immersed himself for purification before bringing his offering. Rather, since the onen had been prohibited from eating kodesh and the mechusar kippurim had been prohibited from even touching it, the sages decreed that they must immerse after leaving their prohibited status before eating kodesh. Since the onen or mechusar kippurim knew they could not eat kodesh anyway, he might have unthinkingly allowed himself to become tameh, and the sages therefore decreed that whenever someone becomes permitted to eat kodesh, he must first immerse in a mikveh. Since, on the other hand, an onen and a mechusar kippurim are in fact permitted to eat terumah, there is no reason to require them to immerse before eating terumah. The Mishnah discusses an onen again who did not come into contact with his dead relative at the funeral. Had he done so, he would obviously be tameh and require purification before eating terumah. Now, the Mishnah continues, Avalo terumah, but immersion is not required to become fit for eating terumah after leaving such a status. Since a person may eat terumah while an onen or mechusar kippurim, he would surely protect himself against Tumah so that Tirumah will not become forbidden to him, and immersion is therefore unnecessary when he leaves either status. And we continue now with Mishnah Daled. The previous Mishnah dealt with stringencies of Kodesh over Tirumah. The next three Mishnayot 4 through 6, deal with stringencies of Tirumah over Kodesh. These stringencies concern the trustworthiness of Amei Haaretz in regard to matters of Tumah and Tara. Amei Haaretz, which are those who are ignorant of and therefore generally careless about the laws of Tumah and Tara, as opposed to Chavrim, who are careful about matters of Tumah. Since many Amei Haaretz cannot be trusted in these matters, the sages decree that they must be regarded as tameh. Therefore, any food, beverage, or utensil that they touch generally becomes tameh. Like the Mishnah will explain, the rabbis made some exceptions to this rule. Choma b'truma, stringency of Tirumah over Kodesh is shebiuda ne'emanim al tarat yain v'shemen kol yemot hashana. In the province of Yehuda, Amei Haaretz are trusted regarding the tara of sacrificial wine and oil throughout the year, but by rabbinic decree they are not trusted about the tara of Tirumah wine and oil during most of the year. Now, the rabbinic decree that beverages touched by Amei Haaretz be considered tameh does not apply to wine or oil that was pressed for use in temple offerings, wine for nesachim, and oil in a mincha offering. Since Amei Haaretz do appreciate the holiness of sacrificial items, we are reasonably confident that they protect the tara of these items and tell only the truth about their status. So whenever an Amei Haaretz states that his wine or oil of Kodesh is tahor, he is believed. Now, although the Mishnah states its law in regard to Yehuda, the same law would have applied in Galil as well, except for the following reasons. Since non-Jews of the times of the Mishnah did not always mark their graves, the rabbis decreed Tumah upon anything that enters non-Jewish land due to the possibility that it may have passed over an unmarked grave, as it discusses in Masechet Shabbat, page 15b. Now, the land of Israel at this time was divided into two provinces, Yehuda and Galil, which were separated by a strip of non-Jewish land that was populated by the Kutim, a pagan group. This meant that any wine or oil sent from Galil to Yehuda, where the temple was located, had to pass through Kuti land and became tameh before reaching its destination. Since it was impossible for the Galil wine to have reached the temple in a tahor state, the Mishnah stated its law only in regard to Yehuda. Now, although Amei Haaretz were careful with Taraf, Kodesh, sacrificial items, they were not as careful with Tirumah, and this made the sages less confident that Amei Haaretz would always be aware of the Tarah status of Tirumah, and they therefore did not trust in Amei Haaretz to vouch for his Tirumah status during most of the year. Ubishat agitot v'abadim afal Tirumah. However, during the wine pressing and olive pressing seasons, they are trusted regarding the Tarah of Tirumah as well, because they were more careful during this season. During the harvest and pressing seasons, all Jews, even Amei Haaretz, would purify their utensils and themselves to ensure that the Tirumah about to be separated from their produce would remain tahor, and therefore if Amei Haaretz assert during this season that their Tirumah is tahor, we trust them. Now, the stringency of Tirumah then is that Amei Haaretz are trusted about his Tarah status only during certain seasons, whereas they are trusted about the Tarah status of Kodesh year-round. Now, the Mishnah continues to discuss the trustworthiness of Amei Haaretz regarding Tirumah. Avru agitot v'abadim, if the wine pressing and olive pressing seasons passed, ve'viu lo chavit shel yain shel Tirumah, and Amei Haaretz brought a barrel of Tirumah wine to a Kohen who is a chaver. A chaver, we said, is someone who is very careful with matters of Tumah and does not even eat chulin that is tahor unless he is tahor, and he therefore does not rely on the Torah standards of Amei Haaretz. If he's claiming that it's tahor, this Amei Haaretz who brought a barrel of Tirumah wine to a Kohen, lo yikablena mimenu, the Kohen may not accept it from them, since, like we said, Amei Haaretz are trusted to vouch for the Torah status of Tirumah only during the pressing season, which in this case has already passed. Aval manicha legata ba'a, even after the pressing season, however, an Amei Haaretz may set his Tirumah wine aside until the next wine pressing season, when he will again be trusted, and then present it to the chaver. Although the Kohen knows that the wine was pressed in an earlier season, and therefore the Amei Haaretz's possession during the months that he is not considered trustworthy, still the Kohen may use the wine, since the rabbinic decree against trusting Amei Haaretz does not apply during the pressing season. Obviously, an Amei Haaretz may save the Tirumah wine for the Kohen, only if he is also careful to protect it from Tumah between seasons. V'im amarlo, and if after the closing of the pressing season, Amei Haaretz presented a barrel of Tirumah wine to a chaver claiming it was a tahor, and he said to him, Hifrashti letocha revi'it kodesh, I designated within this barrel of Tirumah wine a quarter log of wine for kodesh to be poured as a nesech on the altar. Ne'eman, he is trustworthy. He is trusted not only about the kodesh wine, but even regarding the Tirumah wine, because an Amei Haaretz presented his barrel of Tirumah wine to a Kohen, of which a quarter log, a relatively small amount, had been designated as kodesh to be poured as nesachim upon the altar. Since a quarter log is not enough wine for nesachim, other wine will obviously be added as well. Since the Amaretz is trusted to vouch for the Tara of the Kodesh wine, the sages believed them about the Terumah portion containing the same barrel as well, out of respect for the altar. For if the Terumah wine from the same barrel were to be treated as Tameh, it would be disrespectful to pour Kodesh wine from that barrel onto the altar. Now, another stringency of Terumah Kodesh, Kadei Yain v'Chadei Shemen Hamdumaot, if jugs of wine and jugs of oil that were prepared by Amaretz are a mixture of Terumah, Chulin, and Kodesh, meaning that an Amaretz plans to separate tithes from jugs of Tevin, untithed wine, or oil, and then to designate a portion of the remaining wine or oil as Kodesh, because since Tevel is essentially a mixture of Terumah and Chulin, and some of the wine and jugs is earmarked for Kodesh, the Mishnah terms it as a blend of a mixture of Terumah, Chulin, and Kodesh. Ne'emanin alehem b'shat hagitot v'abadim, if the Me'aretz states that the jugs and their contents are tahor, they are trusted during the wine pressing and the olive pressing seasons, not only about the contents, but even about the tara of the jugs themselves. Although most utensils of a me'aretz are temeh by rabbinic decree, the sages trusted them to vouch for the tara of the jugs holding Kodesh wine out of respect for the altar, because it would be disrespectful to pour on the altar wine drawn from jugs that are being treated as tameh, even though the wine itself is treated as tahor. And therefore, when a utensil contains a mixture of potential Kodesh, Terumah, and Chulin, and Amaretz is trusted to vouch not only for the tara of the Kodesh, but also for that of the Terumah, Chulin, and the utensils themselves. And at times, when Amaretz are trusted about Terumah alone, however, they are not believed to vouch for their contents that hold them, like we will explain later on. Since Amaretz are right, so we said they are trusted during the wine pressing and olive pressing seasons, not only about the contents, but even about the tara of the jugs themselves. And for 70 days before the wine pressing season, the period during which people purify the utensils in preparation for the pressing season. Since people began purifying their utensils 70 days before the pressing season begins, there is reason to regard the utensils as tahor during those 70 days. Now, an Amaretz is therefore trusted from the beginning of those 70 days to the end of the pressing season about the tara of utensils holding wine that is to be designated as Kodesh. He is not, however, trusted year round. Now, although an Amaretz is trusted to vouch for the tara of actual Kodesh throughout the year, this case deals not with actual Kodesh, but with wine and oil set aside to be designated Kodesh at a later time. Now, Amaretz are not as concerned about the tara of future Kodesh as they are about actual Kodesh, though they do have some concern about wine that will be designated as Kodesh. Therefore, we trust them about the tara of such wine only from 70 days before the pressing season through the end of the season, when they are purifying the utensils, and are therefore more careful about tahara. Now, since Amaretz are trusted about the portion of wine or oil that will eventually be designated as Kodesh, they are also trusted for 70 days prior to the wine pressing season about the tara of the jugs that contain the Kodesh and the portion of Terumah within them. Now, Amaretz are not trusted, however, about the tara of utensils containing only Terumah and no Kodesh. This then is a second stringency of Terumah over Kodesh, meaning when the sages decreed that Amaretz be trusted about the tara of their Kodesh year round, they also trusted Amaretz about the utensils that contain the Kodesh. But although Amaretz are trusted about the tara of the Terumah during the pressing season, the rabbis did not trust them during that time about the utensils that hold the Terumah. Since the honor of the altar is not at stake here, they treated just the Terumah as tahor, but not the jugs. And this is the second stringency of Terumah over Kodesh. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.